welcome to or back to Elle's Library. I'm Elle, obviously. Today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite movies and a bunch of books that kind of give off the same vibe. I love with all of my heart the movie Crimson Peak. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. I rewatch it at least once a year, usually more. And if it's only going to be once, it's going to be in October. It's my favorite Halloween read. I absolutely adore this movie. I love how creepy it is. I love the mansion, the bleeding walls, all of the cool ghosts, everything. I love the visuals of it, the characters, the story, all of it. I love that movie so much. And over the last few years, I have read a good number of books that kind of give off those same vibes as Crimson Peak, and I wanted to share those with y'all today. So without further ado, let's get started on some of the books. Disclaimer, if you are watching this video, I'm assuming that you've seen Crimson Peak and are okay with getting possible spoilers for it, because I will be kind of talking about what about these books remind me of Crimson Peak, which may end up spoiling something, but I will not be spoiling the books, so don't worry there. Alright, cool. Let's get started. So the first book that I have to talk about, and actually the one that inspired me to want to make this video, is Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwood. This book, first of all, has a stunning, gorgeous cover that I'm obsessed with. I read this book about 3 years ago, and I think about it at least once a week ever since. I have no idea why I haven't reread this book, but for some reason I haven't, but I definitely need to. This one is an Ethiopian-inspired fantasy retelling of Jane Eyre, and it follows our main character who is an exorcist, and she gets hired to go to this beautiful mansion to try and clear a curse. So she gets there, starts doing her thing, and she has to work room by room to clear the curse out of this house one by one. There are dozens upon dozens of ghosts and hauntings happening in this house that she has to gradually clear away. This house has immaculate Crimson Peak vibes. It's so perfect. I kind of forget a lot of the details now, like the specifics, but a few things that really stand out to me was so like each room is its own separate curse, and they all kind of do different things. So one of the rooms that I remember, every single night it fills up with blood, literally floor to ceiling, it's blood, and if you get caught in that room, then you'll just spend the entire night drowning in blood and you can't escape it until dawn breaks and you're finally free of that room. There's a closet where when you walk by, it whispers your deepest secrets and your deepest fears to you. Just things like that, where like all of these things are happening all around here. Every single room has its own separate horror, and it's wonderful. I loved this book so much. The romance was fantastic as well, and just overall this was such a phenomenal book. The atmosphere was incredible. It was so beautifully written, and again, just those Crimson Peak vibes were so perfect. I definitely need to read this book again at some point soon, hopefully before spooky season ends. But yeah, if you have not read this one, you definitely should. Next up is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This one is a contemporary horror thriller type thing. This one is about a woman who goes back to her family home for the first time in years because her mother is dying, but she hasn't been back there in a very long time because it's the home where her father was murdering people in the basement when she was a child. That's all that I'm going to say about the synopsis of that book. I think that you should really go into that one pretty much blind and don't know too much more about it than that. It was so good. This one has gotten some mixed reviews, but I personally loved this one. I thought it was phenomenal. It had a whole bunch of tropes that I personally really love, and I love them because they remind me of Crimson Peak. I can't say which tropes are similar between this book and that movie because it would spoil the book, but there are a bunch of plot points in this book that are pretty similar to Crimson Peak, mainly the like, you know, going to this like forbidden house, that sort of thing, and a couple other ones that happen later in the book that just hit those plot notes so perfectly and brought me so much joy reading this book. I thought it was fantastic. It was creepy as hell. The main character feels more and more unhinged as you go along, and things get really weird in this book. I loved every single second of it. I thought it was truly a fantastic book. I love this author as well, and the whole time it gave me like modern Crimson Peak vibes in a few very significant ways. Next up is a recent read for me, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This one is set in 1950s Mexico, and it follows a young woman who has received a disturbing letter from her cousin who was recently married and went off to live with her new husband in this like mansion in the middle of nowhere. And in the letter, the cousin seems very mentally unwell, so the main character goes out to check on her and see if she's doing okay and if she needs any help, and shit goes down from there. This book got really weird in a really, really good way. The main character gets there and all these things start happening that are just like a little bit eerie, and it feels very dreamlike, and she's even not sure if she's dreaming or not. And as you go along, there's just this like building sense of dread, and things start getting more and more unhinged, and it just crescendos into this epic moment of what the fuck is going on. It was so good. This one also has actually the same trope as Just Like Home, that relates to Crimson Peak, that I can't say what it is because it would spoil this book. But yeah, just again with like certain plot points really kind of hit the same notes as Crimson Peak. They have similar tones, a kind of like creepy feeling of dread the whole time, things kind of flashing in the corner of your eye that's gone before you can turn around, that kind of thing going on in here. And again, this was just like a phenomenal book in general, but especially as a comparison to Crimson Peak. This really matched the vibes of that movie so well, and I had such a great time reading it. Another recent read was The September House by Carissa Orlando. This one is about a couple who buys a house, and the real estate agent was trying to tell them about the murders, but they were so enthralled by the beauty of this house that they really weren't listening. So they buy it, they move in, and they quickly learn that this house is haunted as fuck. It's haunted all year long, like there are constantly ghosts kind of hanging around everywhere, but every September things get wild. Everything just kind of kicks up a notch or 10. The walls start bleeding, the ghosts are screaming, there's music playing everywhere, a whole bunch of things are going on. And in this couple's third year in this house, the husband is like, fuck this, I'm out, and he dips, but the wife is like, nah, I'm staying, like this is my home and no ghost is going to kick me out of it. So she decides to power through it. But then her daughter learns that the husband is missing and that she hasn't heard from him in quite a while, so the daughter comes to visit to try and find her dad, and she has no idea about the hauntings, and so the wife is just trying to like get through September without her daughter learning about all of the weird hauntings going on. Things get so weird in this book. It was so good. This one is also a funny novel. It had a whole bunch of dark humor to it, which I loved, and the ghosts in this were super creepy, but not all of them were bad. A lot of them were actually just like pretty helpful, which is not a spoiler. You find that out within the first few pages of the book. But like one of the ghosts just kind of follows her around all the time and like makes her tea and cooks her dinner and does her laundry, and she's doing all of these like regular household maid things while she has an axe in her head. There's just this level of absurdity to it that is so strange that it becomes funny, and the main character is completely delusional. Like she's just unhinged. She's gotten weirdly used to all of these terrifying ghosts around her. Most of them aren't bad, they just look really scary. So this one reminded me of Crimson Peak, like the way that the ghosts act, because in Crimson Peak a lot of the ghosts are quite helpful. They look really scary, they've got blood and guts coming out everywhere, but they're just kind of trying to be helpful, and that's pretty much what's happening in the September House as well. It's just these ghosts look terrifying as fuck, but they're actually really helpful and sometimes really nice. So most of them, at least. There are a good few that are not so nice. And then yeah, the whole like bleeding walls thing and like the creepy things in the basement, all that stuff is going on in this book as well as in Crimson Peak, and I had a blast reading this book because of all those good vibes to it. Next up is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This one is really similar to Crimson Peak in terms of the setup. This one follows a young girl, I think she's about 12 in this book. She's been living in an orphanage for most of her life, and all that she has left of her previous life is her mother's journal, and in that journal her mother warns her to never go back to Gallant. But then one day she receives a letter from a long lost cousin saying that they've found her and they invite her to come home to their family home called Gallant. So she goes off to Gallant and gets there and learns that nobody in the house sent that letter, and they have no idea who she is. She is their family, but they have no idea who found her or who sent her the letter, and she's very much not welcome there by them. She sees that there's this like iron fence in the yard, and she's been told very firmly to not go past that fence, and nobody will tell her why. This book was so beautifully atmospheric. I loved the main character so much. It's perfect for the fall season as well. It's super creepy and dark and atmospheric. There's this like really intense feeling of longing for home and for family in this book that really reminded me of Crimson Peak as well. And yeah, just like in terms of both vibes and plot, this was really similar to Crimson Peak in all those ways, and I love this book on its own, but also as a comparison comparison to that movie as well. And then last on this list is also a recent read. That one is She Is a Haunting by Tran. This one I personally didn't love. I gave it a 3-star or 2.5, something like that. I wasn't personally a big fan of this book, but I do think that others would enjoy it. It's just I'm not a big fan of YA contemporary stuff, so it didn't work for me, but I could definitely see it working for a lot of other people. But this one follows a teenage girl whose dad ended up like abandoning their family and moving back to Vietnam, and they're kind of estranged, but he tells her that he'll pay for her college tuition if she comes to live with him and his family home in Vietnam for the summer. So off she goes and quickly learns that the house is very much haunted, but nobody will believe her about it. So she and her friends start to set up fake hauntings in order to get people to believe them about the real hauntings. I did really enjoy the haunting elements of it, the real ones, not the fake ones. The atmosphere of this book was pretty good as well, and it again hits those pretty similar plot beats of Crimson Peak with the whole like, you know, going to the family home and the helpful ghosts and that kind of thing that I thought was super fun to read. I wish that I liked this book more, but again, that was just a me thing. I don't like whiny teenagers. I don't like reading about them, but I did really like everything else surrounding them, and it was definitely a great comparison to Crimson Peak. But yeah, those are all the books that I've personally read that remind me of Crimson Peak. I have a whole bunch more on my TBR, but I want to actually read them first before giving them as recommendations. So there may be a part 2 to this video at some point, and if anybody watching has any recommendations for Crimson Peak-esque books, please let me know in the comments. I'm literally always looking for those same vibes all the time. I love that vibe so much. I love pretty much any haunted house book or movie, but the specific plot points and vibes of Crimson Peak is so perfectly my shit that that I love finding books that are similar to that. Not every haunted house story has Crimson Peak vibes, but the ones that do are always amazing to me. So yeah, let me know if you have any in the comments down below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and also if you've read any of these books as well, let me know. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!